Welcome to the PreSales Podcast. I'm Mattie Stremic, and I'm hosting our brand new series on becoming a world-class solutions consultant. In this 6-part series, we'll unpack real-life stories and get actionable insights from pre-sales leaders, managers, and ICs that know what it means to go above and beyond in their pre-sales and solution roles.
Hi there, my name is Yuji Higashi, co-founder of PreSales Collective, and I have big news to share with you if you're a pre-sales leader or an individual contributor early in your career. We recently launched 2 training and enablement programs aimed at helping you take your career to the next level. Both programs were created by pre-sales leaders with input from dozens of SC veterans across our community. Now, we'll be running cohorts each month, so if you're interested in participating, visit us at presalescollective.com/enablement to submit an inquiry, and we'll send you details about each program, including this curriculum and schedule. We look forward to working with you on growing your career and being part of your career journey. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
Hey, PreSales Collective, we're back with part 4 of our Becoming a World-Class Solutions Consultant series. And today I'm here with Adam Lazzara, who's the VP of Solutions Engineering at Soci, to talk about maintaining a learner's mindset. Welcome to the PreSales Podcast, Adam. How are you today?
I am fantastic. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited for this episode on really finding out what does it mean to maintain a learner's mindset. And I really appreciated our initial conversation when we first talked about this podcast. So I'm so excited for our audience to, really hear your perspective and stories on what does it mean to be a continuous learner.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and help share some knowledge, and been a big follower of PreSales Collective since it started. So this is exciting for me.
I first heard about Soci when you all hired Kelly Lehman from the PreSales Academy over, I think, a year and a half ago, and have been a huge fan, have followed it ever since. And it sounds like you guys have grown so much within even the last year.
I'm happy to say that we took Kelly and Curtis Barber, and they are fantastic and amazing people, amazing SEs. Y'all did a heck of a job. But yeah, they're just wonderful people. So happy and thankful to have them on the team.
They're both really great. I would agree. Before we get into the topic today, why don't you start us off with a little bit about your pre-sales journey? How did you end up where you are today?
Sure. So if you think way, way, way back in the day, you remember those books that used to come to the door that would have all the phone numbers in them that were predominantly yellow? I would sell yellow pages, advertising in yellow pages many, many, many moons ago. So that just kind of dates myself into how long I've been in sales and doing this. But I quickly transitioned to a digital platform after a few years in yellow page sales when things started to really kind of change digitally. And so I was doing sales for a company called City Search at the time, which was like Yelp before Yelp was Yelp. And it was a really, really great platform to meet restaurants and businesses and such. So my sales career kind of continued on for a little bit. And then I got into social when social media started to really become a thing. Back in the day when you used to see those like my page for exclusive content, those types of promotions that were going out across Facebook and such. And I worked for a startup company called Buddy Media. What they were doing was really kind of building out those pages. So that's kind of how I got my start. I started there in sales, but quickly realized that I was really good at the technical part and not necessarily as good at the selling part, the hunting part, the things that AEs go through. So people started to ask me about, why don't you just come and do the demo for me? And I'm like, can we do that? Is that okay? And so they're like, yeah, we can kind of make it a job. I'm like, there's a job that lets me do this, lets me come in and like the deal's qualified and I can just present the solution and do a demo. And that's my job. That's what, yeah, perfect. Sign me up. I'll do it all day long. So that's kind of how I began. So I really didn't have any sense of how to properly present and demo software. I was taught when you start at the left-hand side of the screen, here's a button up here, go all the way across, all the way down and go through every single screen, literally like training people. But I took that and started to understand that there was a bigger world out there of sales engineers and that this role was something that it didn't have a lot of information that was out there about the role, but there were people that were doing this that I was connecting with and learning from. And that's kind of how I got my start in this whole thing been in sales a long time, then figured out that I can just demo the product, and boom, I was in love. I love the tech, and this was a perfect role for me. So that's how it started some 12 years ago now.
I love that even in that story, just as far as pivoting from sales to pre-sales, you're talking about that you had to go learn best practices and like fumble through things and actually figure out how to do it, which I think ties really back well into what we're talking about, which is in pre-sales, going out of your way to really learn not only the industry that you're working in, but the technologies that you're selling ultimately and the prospects that you work with. So when we think about in the context of pre-sales, why is having a learning mindset so important?
Having a learning mindset is so important because it allows you to solve problems in different ways. If your thinking is just one way and you are taught one way to do something, then you don't have a multiple perspective lens on how to approach a problem that's unique. So it seems like in pre-sales, we get all these different problems from all the buyers and they have different situations, and we got to attack these problems from different angles. So it's great to broaden your horizon on how you actually present, how you go about solving the problem, and the things that you do when you don't know the answer. That's super important as well. Trying to solve, figure out those problems, leveraging other experts that you've surrounded yourself with, and trying to truly find an angle to solve that problem.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. When we think about learning, it can feel a little overwhelming as far as constantly learning, because there's a lot to learn. What are some of those things that are important to learn in a pre-sales role, whether you're an IC or a leader?
Some of the things that you want to be able to learn and focus on in your role as an individual contributor, and we'll talk about what it looks like from a leadership perspective too. But as an IC, there's three main tenets that you want to kind of hitch your wagon to. Number one, understanding your product. Obviously, everybody's going to say, of course, you got to become a product expert. So you've got to know that. The second one is around the industry. So you want to understand what's happening around you in your space, because at the end of the day, people are looking to you for guidance. You're looking to be the trusted advisor in these sales calls, but you're kind of selling in disguise, but they do trust you. So you have to have thoughts on the industry. You have to have stories that talk about what's going on in their world. So you've got to have that expertise. So you got to know your industry. And then the last piece is the competitive piece. You've got to know what your competitors are doing. And that's probably the trickiest piece out there, because it's not as simple as tracking the industry. You know, you find an RSS feed of news from a particular source and you get funneled this information. But when you look at competitors, what you're doing is they're putting out content that's in their best interest, right? Like how to do certain things. So you really have to do a little bit more digging and searching to find out how people are using that product, what some of the feedback is on that product. So those Glassdoor reviews, those G2 reviews, Trust Radius, anything that can be talked about regarding your competitors is important to pay attention to, not just looking at their blog posts, because they're going to give you really what they want to just kind of put out there and try to garner views and whatnot. So you got to dig there. So those are the three areas of an IC that you really need to hone in on. From a leadership perspective, you want to know your industry, you want to know your competitors, but your focus changes a little bit. You're not going to be as deep into the product as your ICs are. You want to maintain good working knowledge. You want to understand what your ICs are going through in the field. So you've got to stay close to the field. What I say here is don't disconnect yourself from the field. You need to make sure that you understand what your people are going through. So you are learning your product. You are getting some of that insight. But you've got to adjust your thinking too, to think strategically. You've got to think about the long-term vision of what the team is going to go through, what the company is going to go through, how you cast that vision. You really have to read a lot about things that work in leadership, how to motivate people, how to create these cultures of guidance that I call them. You're looking out for the best interest of the team. You're knowledgeable about your product. You're knowledgeable about the competition. You're knowledgeable about the industry. But really, you got to make sure that you're creating an environment that people embrace, that love to be a part of. That's really the foundation for building really successful teams is creating that comfort in the culture.
There's so much there. I guess my question to follow that up with is, how do you as a leader prioritize where you're investing your time to really expand your knowledge?
It's hard. And prioritization is probably the big thing that I see other leaders that don't have a lot of experience doing this struggling with, because you try to be all things to all people. So it's a challenge, no question. You really have to be deliberate with your learning, because people are going to say all the time, well, I really wish I could read more. I wish I can watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, watch this webinar. I wish I could do those things, but I'm just so busy. Okay, look, everybody's busy. Everybody is busy. President Barack Obama read for 1 hour a day. You're not more busy than the president, okay? Like, find a way to set aside an hour of time. Now, that hour of time can move because you've got to prioritize. Deals are coming in, end of quarter, AEs, all this stuff is coming at you. But you've got to find 2 30-minute blocks somewhere in your day to actually say, I'm going to read something, I'm going to look at something, I'm going to watch something, and have a takeaway from that. It all kind of comes back to prioritization, being deliberate with your learning, and then kind of mixing it up a little bit in how you do that.
Tell me a little bit more about what do you mean by mixing it up?
So when you think about how people learn, and this is something I actually ask in interviews all the time, it's like, how do you like to learn? Because I want to see what people tell me here. And people say one of 3 things. I'm either a hands-on learner, they learn by experience, right? Getting out there and doing it. Or they read everything, just give me the product manual. I'll read it all, I'll know it all. Or I'm a visual learner. So you've got 3 aspects for how people like to learn. And when you look at studies about this, like Princeton did this great study about how people learn and what the most effective ways of learning are. Those 3 aspects are all different aspects, and you really shouldn't just hone in on the one that you're the most comfortable with. You should mix up different things and spend time in different areas. That way you're not going through the motions, but you're challenging yourself a little bit. People pick one way because it's comfortable for them, but you've got to mix that up and keep it fresh and keep it different. So that way you retain more of the information when you do that.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And it's easy to get comfortable with one way of doing things, or just doing podcasts or just doing blogs. But I think I agree. It's so important to diversify how you're learning and when you're learning. One of the things that really stood out to me earlier is that you were talking about being deliberate about your learning. Can you give some examples of how you have built that habit personally, and how maybe you've seen others do it that might look a little bit differently?
So this whole multitasking deal, people think that they could be more effective by doing 10 things at once. Look, right now, when we're recording this podcast, I'm sitting in front of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different screens. Okay. I have probably about 30 tabs behind this opened up. So by being deliberate, what you need to do is you need to close all this stuff and not just say to yourself, well, I just won't pay attention. No, Slack is not stopping. Right now, it's going off. So you're constantly looking over at it. You need to shut that down, and you need to just do a solid 30 minutes of reading something, focusing on one thing. And if you do that and you come out of that 30 minutes and then everything else is back around you, you're going to feel like you actually really did accomplish something. So you need to be deliberate in your learning, because otherwise you're not really taking that 30 minutes, that 60 minutes. It's broken off into different things and fires that are starting left and right around you in your world, and your concentration is broke. So how much of that do you really, really retain? There's that aspect of making sure that you're not falling into this. I could do multiple things at once, because it just doesn't work. And if it does work, you're not as effective as you think you are at multitasking.
That is so important. I had to mute Slack just a few minutes ago. I do think that it's something that I know I personally struggle with, and I think a lot of people do, is trying to handle so many things happening at once, and also sometimes figuring out where to hone in on. Sometimes I personally struggle because I'll start a blog that I saw on LinkedIn and then I'll get a newsletter and then I'll start that. And sometimes I don't even finish. And then I'm not even reflecting and I'm also multitasking. So I think it goes back to what you just said. It's not an effective way to learn when you're allowing yourself to be scattered across your various screens and pings that you're getting.
You have to develop a system for yourself too. The more that gets put on your plate, there's more things to do. And you think you can remember that Slack that came in that asked you to do something while 4 other people are vying for your attention. How do you capture this stuff? How do you retain it? So you have to have some sort of task management system in some capacity to start to remember where these action items come from. There's a lot of technology that helps with productivity that's out there. I really kind of look at and study these things, these different platforms out there. Anybody that knows me will probably tell you that I am a big fan of different types of tech and I try out a lot of things, probably much to the dismay of some of the folks that I work with, because I always have a new recommendation. People are like, why don't you just pick one? But you have to take your time and figure out what works best, because we use different systems. I've got different tasks coming from different areas that all get funneled into one single system. So at the start of my day, I sit down. The first thing I look at on my screen is, what did we accomplish yesterday? So the tasks that I actually completed yesterday, I look at that and then I say, here's my inbox of stuff, all of the things. And now I have to say, okay, well, looking at today's calendar of meetings that I do have, I've got several breaks within those meetings. So now I can start to schedule things in those time blocks. So it's my way of working through the things that need my attention to really kind of check them off the list. That's just a part of one system of getting things done, but also it's learning too, because let's face it, PreSales Collective publishes a blog. I want to read it. I can't read it right now though. So I grab it and just kind of save it. And then that makes my list, right? So if I have 15 minutes, I say, oh, I know it's not going to be 15 minutes. I plug that in, boom, I'm reading that and I get that done with. You have to have a system for yourself in how you kind of collect and organize the information that's around you.
I think this is going back to being deliberate, because what you're explaining is the systems and habits and choices that allow you to then pursue your learning goals versus just passively saying, yeah, I'm a continuous learner. I'm going to learn. It's just going to happen sometime in between all of these meetings.
Right. Yeah. You'll never get to it. If you don't block out the time or set aside the time, you won't do it. If you don't have a task system, you will miss something. I challenge people when they ask me, like, what about the books you're reading? What books are you reading? I learned very quickly that the books that I was reading, I wasn't retaining the information. And I challenge anybody that's out there listening to this. 5 books ago, what did you read? What did you read 5 books ago? Can you tell me? You probably can't. You probably have to really think about it and kind of look at your bookshelf and be like, I think it was whatever. So instead, I took this idea of looking at on my iPad, the Kindle app, downloading these books, making highlights. But then I had a problem. Like, okay, I go through these books and I make all these highlights on the Kindle. So how do I know, like, okay, I got to go back 7 books ago because they talked about GTM strategy that I think I can use for something that's coming up? You can't, right? Like, where is that information? So it's about organizing this. And what I do is I use something called Readwise. Big shout out to whomever is running that small little amazing company. But essentially what it is it allows you to connect Readwise to a bunch of different sources. So I started with, getting all my Kindle highlights pushed into Readwise, because what Readwise does for me, it allows me to view in kind of this flashcard format every single day, 10 cards. I set it up for 10 different cards every single day. And at the end of my day, right before I go to bed, I read through these 10 cards. And these 10 cards are highlights that I've made in these books that I've read. So it's a way for me to kind of keep this stuff fresh. And then I was able to start taking things from different sources and pushing that into Readwise and capturing really everything that I was consuming, pumping it into that particular app, and then just reading and studying and just kind of developing that routine. So it works for me. You've got to find your own system of what's comfortable to you and what works for you. But at the end of the day, I really challenge people to say, with everything that goes on in your world, being better at something is something that's really difficult to do and take on. Like, how do you start? Like, we need to be 30% better. We need to be 50% better. I got to be better. Start with 1% better every single day. And every single day, if you come away from your day with learning something about anything, you're going to be 1% better that day. And so over time, that accumulates. And now, after a year, that's significant accumulation of time and knowledge that you are able to capture and now retain and know. So I try to keep it in small, bite-sized blocks.
Absolutely. And what a great way to kind of approach sometimes the feeling of being overwhelmed of where do I even start, or where do I prioritize, or, what do I learn? I think boiling it down to focusing on 1% better and then setting up a system like you have currently. I also think that at this point in the podcast, people probably are pausing the podcast to go download Readwise. I know I'm going to after this episode, but I think that's really incredible. And I appreciate your perspective and how you personally approach learning. What about with your team? How do you foster this type of mindset with your pre-sales team?
This is an area that you really have to create a culture of guidance. I choose that word very deliberately, guidance instead of feedback, because we've all heard, hey, I've got some feedback for you. And it's never good. You get this sense of dread within you. And now you got a meeting in 2 days with your boss and he said, I got feedback for you. We're going to talk on our one-on-one and that's 2 days from now. So now 2 days, 48 hours, I'm dreading the conversation that's about to happen. What did I do wrong? Why was it bad? Who did I let down? All of this stuff just floods through your head. And you develop these feelings of like, I'm not adequate. So guidance is something I think that we all can get behind, because if you're hiring people onto your team in your company, you want people that embrace being coached. You want those folks to say, I want to learn from you and others around me. And so how we do that is we kind of make it comfortable for people to have conversations and say, hey, I really think that if we tried it this way, it might work better for you. Let's give it a shot. Or did you know you're doing this? Guiding people to be better at their job. And this aligns with setting goals and doing all of those things that you need to do for your folks. Because now we're working towards being better as opposed to just jumping on them feedback that you have about a call that went sideways. Creating that culture also means being vulnerable and saying to your teams or your people that are around you, like, you know what? I was wrong on this, or I got this wrong, or this was a mistake that I made. I'm not perfect. I tell the folks that I work with that this is our team. It's not my team. It's collectively all of ours. And what that means is you've got to be comfortable giving me guidance and feedback, no matter how difficult it might be. If I don't know about it, then I can't help fix it. So I don't have all the answers. I've got some ideas. I keep people around me that put me in check and say, hey, maybe that's not such a great idea, because you trust people. So that's a big part of creating this culture of guidance is trust, making sure that you're doing the right things for people and you're guiding their career by giving them guidance and not just, hey, this was really terrible and bad. You shouldn't have done that. Nobody wants to hear that. That doesn't help anybody.
I think that's incredible as far as reframing what we sometimes just put so much emphasis on just giving feedback versus guidance. And I can see as a leader how impactful that would be. Earlier, you mentioned that as an IC, it's really important to learn the industry, to learn the technology and your competitive edge, or to understand your competitors. How do you help your team grow in those areas?
So what we like to do is we always want to make sure that by creating this culture of people that are being guided, getting that information, learning things, that they're feeding it back into the team. So if you set things up right, you create this ecosystem of a team that not only supports each other, but shares things that have worked or went catastrophically wrong, because they don't want others to make the same mistake. And so that's a big part of creating a successful team, is people being comfortable with one another and then saying, hey, I found this out. I didn't know it. Maybe somebody else didn't know it either. Let me share that. That's one way of doing these things. But you also have to create the vehicle for learning too. You've got to do role plays. You got to practice things. You got to talk things through and approach it not from a perspective of this is how I would do it as the leader of the team, but hey, what do you think about this? What do you think is the best way to go about it? Let's practice it. Let's talk it through. Let's go through it. Creating that deliberate time for people to learn, properly be enabled. We've all taken these trainings too, right? Where you click through 20 screens, you answer the quiz at the end, and then boom, you're done. Did you really learn it, or did you just get through it because you had to do it? So you've got to do different things, and you got to talk some of these things through. That way that information is retained, because generally speaking with SEs, you're really focused on the deals that are in your brain right now and the problems in those deals that you have. So any deal challenges that currently exist are the ones that you're trying to solve for. So if you're learning about something that doesn't impact what you got going on right now at the moment, you're probably not too keen on retaining that. So you always got to mix it up, keep it fresh, bring it back up to the team, see where the gaps are, find ways to help your folks be better. And they'll appreciate it because you'll get really solid feedback across the board for what they need and what they don't need. And that's super important.
When you say that you're really fostering an environment for your team around learning, do you all have any specific meetings around providing feedback? I'm just curious, what does that look like? What kind of systems or processes have you set up?
You want to try different things because some things will work, other things will fail, and people will be like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Trying different things is something that you have to kind of throw out there. And sometimes we've thrown out a couple of ideas where we have just people get together without leadership and talk about whatever comes to mind. Think about what could we start, stop, or continue to do, right? We'll have those types of sessions. We'll put anonymous surveys out there. Nothing too much that's over the top and we inundate our people with this, but we always want to make sure that we're getting a sense of what they need, what they like, what they dislike, and then we adjust. So, you've got to keep trying different things. I don't think that there's one certain answer. Try things, fail, learn from it, move fast, try something different. I tell people all the time, we're selling software. Nobody's dying on the operating table today. You're going to make mistakes. Learn from them. They're only truly mistakes if you don't learn from them and you repeat them. So let's use those as opportunities. When you do all of these things combined, I think that you get a different temperature within your team. I always kind of harken back to the days of the Monday morning, sales team meeting every Monday at 9:00, where we just go over the same old thing every week. And I always said to myself, if I'm ever a leader, I'm never doing that with people because people hate it. It's Monday morning. People hate the same old thing. If you try to keep up and do things differently with your team meetings, that will keep it fresh. That will keep the spirit alive and going, and switching up what you're talking about, the format of the meeting, who's running it, who's not present. All of this stuff matters. So doing different things, seeing what works, discarding what doesn't work, and just keep moving forward. That's the key.
This is so important because I think what you shared today is all about that it doesn't have to be one right way to be an active learner. You don't have to put yourself in a box or force yourself to do one thing. I think from the way that you structure and create this type of environment with your team to how you do it personally can really vary. And I know that's something I'm taking away from this podcast too, is also it can look very different. And then I'm going to mix it up to make it even a little bit more fun, I think, and a little less overwhelming. To kind of close us off here, what's your closing advice for those that are trying to maintain a learner's mindset in 2023?
2 points. Look at being 1% better. Just adopt this habit. And it doesn't have to be professional. It could always apply to your personal life too. As long as you're making incremental gains, that stuff's going to add up and that's going to propel you into the future. And then my second point, if you've been working in the industry, you've been working in the space, your technology in and out, you can do this blindfolded. Don't get complacent. You think you can wing this because you know so much. Everything changes. Keep yourself on top of the change. So challenge yourself to kind of continually learn new things and then share those things with others. You put more good out into the universe, good things will happen eventually for you. So take that. I hope that's helpful, but that's a little bit about how I live my life and move forward every single day, one step at a time.
Adam, this has been so incredible. I really appreciate the stories and the examples and the practical advice. I know for me, I have a lot of takeaways. I definitely am going to go download Readwise and, really focus on that 1% better. So thank you again for joining me. It was such a joy to have this conversation, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, folks, thanks for joining for another episode of the PreSales Podcast. Next up in our series, we'll be unpacking developing your external network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.